Hey everybody, welcome to another Tuesday's Tip of the Week. Getting back into things 2 weeks in a row. It's pretty good for me right now. In this week's episode, we're going to be looking at two parts to my aiming and shot execution and the way that I set all that up. The reason this is a two-part process is because we're going to actually separate the way that we're aiming from the way that we're executing. And for me, I think that this leads to the most consistently capable shot. That's probably the best way to put that. It'll help you have the best groupings, the best scores. It's definitely not an easy method to attain a high level at, but if you can get past your own roadblocks and follow what's actually going to be talked about in this video today, you're going to see your scores go up, you're going to see your groups get smaller, and you're going to see your consistency increase as well. So let's get into it today. All right, step number one, we're gonna talk about our aiming. When I first kind of stumbled upon this and started thinking and putting more effort into this, my shot definitely developed at a high rate really quickly. And the reason that I started focusing more on this and thinking more about this and going through it was because of a book by Terry Wonderley, Think Like a Champion. If you haven't read that book, definitely check it out. Not a huge book, but it's got a lot of gold in it. So we're going to talk about one section of it, and it's our subconscious aiming. Our brain, the way that it works, we have a conscious portion of it and a subconscious. In our conscious thought process and what we're focusing on, we can really only do one, maybe two things at a high level, and focusing on those that we're focusing on, that we're putting that effort into. Our subconscious, however, can do 100 tasks at once. So subconscious is how we keep our breathing patterns when we're asleep. It's how we swallow and everything moves in the right direction to keep us from choking. Our heart beats. I can reach out and touch stuff with my hand without really having to think about it. That's our subconscious is doing all of that, and it does it all at one time. So when we look at our aiming and what we're doing with our shot, we want that aiming portion to become a subconscious effort, so that we're not having to put focus into that and we can just allow a shot to happen. Because if we're choking, what I call choking the pin down and trying to force it to a spot, and we're trying to time a shot and punch a trigger or force a shot to happen at a certain time, our subconscious isn't allowed to be able to take over and do its job. So let's talk a little bit more about that right now. All right, so there's a couple different steps to this, and it goes pretty in depth. The setup for this I'm going to go over is a very quick, short version of it. I've got some videos that I've sold through my website and on the channel that show a step-by-step process how to achieve everything that I'm talking about today, and I also offer coaching that I can help kind of guide you through what we're doing in a different format to be able to get you to where we're looking at this today. So super fast, subconscious aiming is going to rely on how we're setting up our shot, the way that we're holding on target and allowing our bodies to get as still as possible. The way that I do that is a couple different methods. One really relies on our bow shoulder. And the way that I'm gonna draw my bow and set that shoulder allows that joint and all the stabilizing muscles in the joint to help take over. And it allows us to be able to have a steadier, more consistent hold on target from one shot to the next. So what I like to do and what I'm teaching on this is my hand gets just above the shoulder when I go to draw back. Now when I actually lift the bow up, I lift it up to here because that's just what I do, but I actually don't start drawing until my hand's usually back around in this point. And the reason I do this rather, is because if you look at the angle that my two hands are in right now, my release hand is lower than my bow hand. What this does when I go to draw the bow back is it forces everything in this bow arm to go into my shoulder socket, and it allows everything to kind of settle in and set. And then when I get to full draw, I get just slightly above the shoulder or pretty even with the shoulder. The reason I don't want my hand below my bow shoulder is because we have basically a seesaw effect with the weight of the bow. If my hand is lower than the fulcrum point at my shoulder, that bow is going to feel heavier. I'm gonna have to force myself to really hold the bow up. But if my hand is even or above, then I'm working at a neutral or positive weight balance, meaning that the weight of that bow is actually shifting to my core. My core can support that weight a lot better. So that's what we're wanting to achieve here as far as how we're keeping our hand and everything on target. The second factor to this is creating tension in our bodies. And I do this with a specific endpoint in mind every time I do this, and it's creating enough tension in my body to hold the steadiest for that shot without breaking my path past that window to where I start to shake or do anything crazy. So if we're gonna look at just me holding my hand up here at the camera and I'll point my finger out, you can see that when I'm here with no tension on it, I can hold my hand pretty steady. But as soon as I put weight in my hand to hold the bow up, and I'm having to hold that weight there without proper tension through our body, my hand starts to move a lot more. So when I'm talking about creating this tension, I'm looking at it from two aspects. One is on our bow side and one is on our release hand side. On the bow side, when we get to full draw, we're gonna start pushing out from our elbow out and creating tension towards the target while we pull away from the target with our release hand. And we're gonna be doing this in kind of a very slow, smooth fashion and watching our sight pin float. And what you'll notice here is as I'm at the camera and pointing, when I create tension in my shot, I can get to a point where my hand virtually stands still, even with me talking here. And then if I start to go too much, you can see I twitch a little bit more. And that's just because the muscle fibers in my body at some point give up and there's overworking them and over tension. So we want to find that window. Every single shot is our setup where we're getting to full draw, slowly building that tension, getting our pin on target, and making sure that it's the best for that first shot or second shot or whatever we're doing, right? It's individually based on shot. Now you'll start to feel a range as you're comfortable with this. You'll pretty much know like, hey, I'm gonna get full draw, I'm gonna expand out, I'm good. But if you're nervous one day, if you're at a tournament, shooting at an animal, whatever it may be, that could potentially change. So I just wanted to give you a heads up there. But that's gonna be the first part here in allowing our body to create that tension and help us hold steadier on target with that aim. All right, the second part of this equation is what we're doing with our release. Me personally, I really strongly feel like you need to manipulate a release in some form or fashion in order to achieve your steadiness on target that maintains all the way through the shot, and then two, to have the most consistency from shot to shot. And let me explain that a little bit more because I know this goes past and it's different from a lot of what you hear. So old thought, way that we're shooting, create tension in the body and then just continually pull through the shot till the shot breaks. So that mindset is built on one from recurves and two from cams on our compound bows when they were older and they had very spongy back walls and you could continually move and move and move, or maybe they didn't have a back wall when they were really old. With today's modern bows, I have a pretty firm and solid back wall, and a lot of bows do, especially if you have a limb stop setup. If you have a limb stop setup or a firm back wall and you try to pull through a shot, you don't have any give for one or enough to execute that shot, and two, you're gonna notice that as you're doing this, you're actually disrupting your aim on target. It's making everything look worse, maybe pulling you off the target in some form or fashion, and it's gonna create some issues. Another reason I don't like that style of shooting is our muscles change day to day and shot to shot. When you're more warm or less warm and stiff, or there's tension in your body because you're nervous, or I don't know, give you 100 different reasons. You're sore one day from a workout the day before, whatever it may be, your muscles react differently. So if you're relying your entire shot on using those muscles to pull through and manipulate the shot that way, then that's creating an environment for a different scenario every single shot, every single day. I don't want to put my success and my shot and what I'm looking at on target on something that has that big of a variable. So for me, when I look at a release, I'm going to manipulate it in some form or fashion. Now, this doesn't mean punch the release. I think that's an extremely bad thing to do. And your manipulation could be as simple as with the hinge release, slowly starting to curl or close the outside fingers, release the index finger, combination of both, or 100 different ways that I've talked about on this channel before. On a thumb release, same thing. You may be manipulating the release by closing the thumb down on the trigger. You may be dragging it across it so it creates tension and eventually trips it. You may be squeezing fingers whatever it may be, right? There's a bunch of different ways that I've talked about before on this channel to do a thumb release. Same thing for an index, slow squeeze on the index. You can do basically like pulling the trigger on a gun. The only thing you really can't manipulate is a tension activated release. And that's why I feel that's more of a training tool than an end game when you want to get the best possible results on target. For most scenarios. There are a few scenarios where I'd say that's probably better for an archer, but that's totally different than what we're going to talk about today. So for me personally, the best methods that I've seen and what I would pass on to you is if you're using a thumb release, I really feel like setting the thumb on the release in this form and then starting to pull back on it, that allows me to have a surprise shot within a certain window that I need to be in. And basically it's just this motion here where I'm pulling back on it. And when I set this up with my thumb on here where the fat part of my thumb is just at the base of it, as I'm just letting the thumb pull back on it, that's allowing it to drag into the trigger. It's creating tension and allows the trigger to trip. Now you can do other methods. Curling the outside fingers works really good. Curling just the middle finger works really good, but for me, on a thumb release, I start lightening the pressure on my thumb if I'm not actively engaging it during a shot. So that's how I handle that. On a hinge release, I curl my middle finger and that's how I rotate a release to shoot it. I know a lot of people have to relax their index finger. For me, I creep on my back wall forward if I do that. So I can't release that index on there. But if that method works best for you, that's fine. It's a way of allowing the mechanical device to work naturally the way that it's supposed to work, right? So that's basically how I'm looking at this and how I'm doing it as far as release manipulation. It's a second completely different portion of my shot. And then it's allowing me to focus on my aim. And we're gonna put all this together so that makes more sense. We'll talk about that now. All right, so putting all this together, I'm gonna tie it back to what we talked about at the first of the video with the book and subconscious aiming. The reason I want my aiming to become a subconscious act is because then I can actively and consciously think about my release manipulation. That becomes a focal point, but what I'm looking at down target is I'm just looking at my float and I'm trusting what I'm seeing on a float pattern and I'm not trying to do anything special with it. I'm just letting it be there. Our brains naturally want to look at patterns. They develop the pattern, they see them, they recognize them, and they follow them. Super simple process. So if our subconscious is naturally seeing the pattern of movement on target with our pin and dot or whatever we have, and that float that we're seeing that day, as we slowly start to work through a release, if we're not forcing that release to shoot itself at a certain time, our subconscious will start to begin to release our arrow when we're at the middle of the target, because we know what we want to do. We know, our brain knows we need that dot or that pin to be in the middle. And as long as we're getting out of our own way and allowing that to happen, we'll do that more often. We can't, so visually if I see my pin moving around on target and I see it move left and I think I need to move it right and I try to force myself to move right, my subconscious has already started moving it right, I'm gonna push myself farther right off target. So if I continue that pattern of trying to move my pin and do everything and force it, I'm actually working way too hard and I'm counteracting what my body is already trying to do. I also can't process it fast enough. It takes too long for me to process visually what I see and give my brain a response to then physically do something. If I'm subconsciously allowing my brain to see the pattern on target and get itself lined up, it will move and put itself in the middle when the shot breaks all on its own, and you may not even think you're in the middle. You may think that you are off the middle, but you see your arrow hit dead center. And those shots are the ones that I'm talking about where you really have to rely on, and you'll see the benefits of allowing your subconscious to work. And basically, the way that I handle everything from shot to shot and my entire process is drawing back on target, getting to full draw and creating that tension by pushing out a little at the elbow and pulling back with the release until I get my steadiest point. Once I've done that, I will go ahead and load my thumb to my trigger on my release. And then I'm just holding it there, allowing my body to see what I'm looking at down target on my aim, the pattern that's happening and everything that's moving around. And I start slowly thinking that I'm pulling my thumb back towards the middle of my palm or you can think to your wrist, your elbow, your shoulder, whatever you may need to do. And the same with rotating, pulling fingers. Think to a certain point, a reference point. And you'll pick that reference point based on what you're seeing as the shot is happening. If my reference point is my shoulder and I start pulling down on the release and my arrows are hitting high consistently, then my reference point may need to be into the wrist or into the elbow because it's a flatter line straight back, whatever it may be. But that is basically all I'm doing when I full draw, and it's just allowing the shot to happen. And eventually that shot happens and it's gonna hit the middle of the target. Super simple and not all at the same time. Sounds probably like witchcraft to a lot of people. I've gotten flack on this over the years, but for everybody that's ever tried this and actually put it into practice, they all come back to me and tell me it's perfect, it works great, and thank you so much for telling it. So give it a shot. Do what the book says to do with Terry Wonderley. Shoot around. Shoot around and force yourself to hit the middle, and force your pin to the middle, and force yourself to time the shot, and do everything by over controlling what you're doing. Shoot another round, and don't do any of that. Just focus on aiming, creating the tension in your body, holding as steady as possible, and allowing the shot to happen. See which one works better. Do your own study on this, but for me, this works better for me and several other archers that I've found over time. Hope this video helps. I really appreciate everybody still watching these, sharing them with anybody you think this will help, posting them out there, spread the word. Appreciate everybody again. Y'all have a great day. I'll talk to you soon.